Get started. Hello and welcome everyone. Happy Wednesday. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Sarah Reed. I am the Director of Marketing here at BrainSell, and today we are focused on exploring the value of investing in the development of an action plan, or what we call a CRM Solution Blueprint, as a first step to evaluating either your existing CRM or if you're looking to invest in a new CRM. So before we get started, I do want to cover a few housekeeping items. This will be a 45-minute presentation. We will allow for a 10-minute formal Q&A at the end. But if you have questions at any point during the presentation, please put them into the question box, and we will, I'll monitor that, and we will ask our presenter at different points during the presentation. So please don't hesitate to put them in the question box at any point. We are also recording this session, and we will be sending a link to the recording as well as to the slide deck via email. You'll probably see that in your inbox tomorrow morning. Okay, and it looks like, just looking at the attendee list right now, we have some familiar folks on the line, we have some brain sellers, we have some customers, and it looks like we also have some people who are new to BrainSell. So let me just give you the 20-second BrainSell introduction to who we are. First and foremost, BrainSell is a growth enablement company. And what that means is that we are focused on your people and your process first. And so the services that we provide and the portfolio of technologies that we offer, they're there to enhance your people and your processes. And that's really in order to help you meet your sales and your overall business growth objectives. So that's BrainSell in a nutshell. And more importantly, it is really my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, who is also a senior solutions architect for BrainSell, and that's Tony Berry. And for almost 3 decades, Tony has worked with companies of all sizes. Right, 4 decades, oh my goodness. We have to update your bio. Of all sizes to develop technology solution roadmaps and implement strategic programs to enable business growth. So hi, Tony, thank you for joining us.
Oh, great, no, my pleasure. And the 4 decades means there's a little gray on the edges now.
That's okay. So before we jump in, Tony, I think it would probably be good to just get a sense of where our audience is in terms of CRM. So let's ask a couple of poll questions. How about that? So the first question is, do you currently use CRM software at your organization? And the responses are yes, Salesforce, you might use Sugar, maybe Infor, or another CRM, or there may be some of you that are not currently using CRM. So it looks like coming in, it looks like we're split. So 33% of the folks on the phone are using Salesforce. The other 33% are using Infor. We have a handful, Tony, about 17% that aren't using any CRM at all currently. So of those that are using CRM, on a scale of 1 to 5, how well do you feel like your CRM implementation has gone to date? And I'll launch that. So looking at responses for this, it looks like the majority of folks are in the, so 67%, 75%, it's usable but struggling with adoption. So that, I don't think there's any real surprises there, right, Tony?
No, that would that's kind of typical. So I think this is the right webinar then.
All right. All right. So at this point, I'm turning it over to you, Tony. I'm going to give you control of the mouse so you can control your slides.
Oh, fantastic.
And let's get into the good stuff.
Fantastic. So give it just a second here to catch up. There we go. So this is the agenda we've put together for today. And again, really appreciate everybody filling out the poll information. We'll make sure and kind of target this towards some of those responses. But we're going to talk through, first of all, kind of why we recommend a solution blueprint. And obviously we're recommending something. We then want to describe for you is what we feel a solution blueprint is. We have a specific process that we use at BrainSell that we found to be very successful and kind of a quick way of accomplishing this. And then obviously anything like this that does, as Sarah mentioned, has an investment or requires effort, we want to make sure that the benefits align. And probably most importantly, we use 2 case studies of real clients at BrainSell. And I think we've picked the right one. One was a new CRM implementation and one was a re-implementation. So I think that actually fits a couple of the questions that came up today. And in the second case, they were, I would say, kind of at that mid-level. So I think it kind of fits. They wanted to increase their adoption and improve their integration. So I think we actually aligned pretty well with the questions that came up. But why don't we start with this? So why would you do a blueprint? What's the importance of it? This technology promises to solve a lot of my problems. Shouldn't I just go ahead and implement it? So I'm going to use the analogy of, would you build a house if you didn't have a blueprint on the way to do that? And clearly there are people that have tried to do this. This is a famous house out in Wyoming. It's called the Smith Mansion. And Mr. Smith built this house over 12 years in the 90s with no plan, no blueprint, didn't believe in them, and ended up after 12 years having a house that had no internal plumbing. He forgot to put in full electricity. So electricity is provided by, believe it or not, an extension cord that runs from a generator. And he also forgot to build a formal bedroom in the house. So they sleep, essentially, the people that slept here. It's not inhabitable at the moment, and that might be a piece of it too. But anyhow, it was not a successful endeavor. And regrettably, poor Mr. Smith actually fell off the roof one day because it wasn't stable. And sad story, actually was his demise. So while we're not saying not doing a blueprint in CRM is going to lead to something that tragic, it certainly can do the same sort of things for you. And so we always recommend, if you're going to implement a new piece of technology, you really want that roadmap or that plan that's going to drive and avoid this type of situation, because clearly he built a house. It just wasn't a house that fit the needs for him and his family. And so that's really what a blueprint is and the reason we do it. And the other reason we do it, and there's been study after study that has shown that while sometimes the advertising from CRM would say otherwise, that just because you purchase the CRM software, that really doesn't guarantee your CRM success. And if we've got kind of several of you that sounds like you've implemented CRM at your organization, but it hasn't been, it's been successful, but not, as successful as maybe you had hoped, sometimes this might be the root cause on that. And this is a study that CSO Insights has done over the last 10 years, and they look at what caused CRM to be successful, and probably more importantly, what caused it not to be successful. And what they found is you really have to approach technology as an enabler. So technology implements, as Sarah mentioned, process and people change for an organization. But the key is aligning it to your customer-centric strategy. So you really have to start at the top and work down. So figure out what you're trying to do strategically, identify what your success metrics are going to be, and then answer really the 2 tough questions: is organizationally, are we aligned to support that? If you're not, you may have some re-engineering or some training to do. This is what's often called change management in an organization. And so you want to take that into account. And then you use technology as an enabler. And you want to do this all around, prioritize needs and requirements. And so the blueprint really outlines all these steps, and it makes sure that you look at the CRM initiative to drive success around your people, your processes, and then technology. And so that's why we recommend going through the blueprinting exercise. Again, it's not hugely from an effort standpoint, but certainly it is something that you should do and put that plan together. So at the end of the day, as you look back, you have a successful initiative. So what is a solution blueprint? Well, a blueprint in general is a guide for making something. You can think of it as a design or a pattern that you need to follow. And we've taken that and kind of applied it to technology. So for us, a solution blueprint is an action plan. And it's an action plan that really drives success of the implementation of the technology you're looking at implementing. Now, today we're going to talk about CRM, but this also applies to ERP, it applies to HR, BI, really any technology initiative. You'll want to really focus on that blueprint for success. Now, in most cases, this will include several different pieces of deliverables, and we'll show you some examples of that as we move forward today. But they're going to fall into these categories. They're going to be a high-level kind of requirement summary, and possibly some recommendations, especially if you're re-implementing. We really want to focus in on the M in that SMART matrix. So what are the key metrics that you're going to use to both measure the results that the CRM tool is bringing for you, and probably most importantly, how are you going to deem whether the project was successful or not? So it's really important to narrow in and identify hopefully a handful of metrics that will help you determine that. And then as Sarah mentioned in the beginning, what we do at BrainSell is we then come back and look at three aspects: people, process, and technology. And what do these requirements and recommendations mean in each of those cases? And then, of course, it wouldn't be a blueprint if it didn't have some architecture in it. So there'll be an architectural, and I'll show a couple examples of this. And a common piece that we're seeing today is this idea of an integration or a migration plan. So if you're moving systems, how do I move that data? Or if I'm trying to integrate my CRM with my ERP, maybe my website, my marketing tools, what does that integration look like? And how can I accomplish it quickly? And always when we go through the blueprinting, we're also asking a couple questions like, how long is it going to take and how much is it going to cost? And so those are the things that we'll actually also identify in the blueprint. This is one of the hidden benefits of it, is it really starts to give you that true budget, that true timeline, and also the true effort that it's going to take to achieve the things that you want to do. And this is why those prioritized requirements are so important, because you do want to typically move pretty quickly with these projects, but not so quickly that you don't take into account the things you want to accomplish in the future. And if, I know for several of you, this was sounds like you don't have CRM at the moment. If you are looking to make a selection, we'll also typically include a short list of the potential vendors. And one of the case studies I'm going to show today, we did help a client not only make their software selection, but then actually implement it. And then what we do a lot at BrainSell, because this shouldn't just be a thought exercise, it shouldn't be a large document, but rather should be something that becomes a starting point, is we do what we call a proof of concept. And so this is now, once we've learned all this, let's now take the tool, that Salesforce or Sugar or Infor, and let's configure it for what we want the end result to be. Now, obviously, it's not finished at this point, but it's at least enough that we all get a vision and an understanding and can start to see what the tool is going to look like when it gets implemented. So we found that to be very beneficial. In fact, one of the case studies I'm going to show you today, we went through an extensive proof of concept to really help the users get kind of adopted to what was coming in the near future. So that's what a solution blueprint is, and this is our process. Now, I'll unpack this slide because it's a little complex here, but you'll see we use this grid over and over again to kind of summarize the way we go about the blueprint. So think of the blue at the top as the steps we typically go through, and then the blue going down are what we do within each of those steps. And so what we do with this process, and we try and move pretty quickly, because obviously you don't want to spend months doing the blueprint, have the market or industry change, and then have to start the process over. So we've done these as short as a couple of weeks. The longest is we try not to get more than a month and a half. We'll kind of be on the long end of this, but typically this is weeks to move this forward. We'll do a little pre-interview planning. This is just to understand what's important, those prioritized requirements. We'll then want to look at the current state. So really, what are the systems that are in place that either the re-implemented CRM will integrate with, or if you don't have CRM, what will that need to work with and play nicely with? And then the most important part is really talking to the subject matter experts within each of the functional areas, which I'll get to in a second, and making sure we really understand the expectations and the requirements for each of those groups, because CRM is so I call it's a team sport when you implement it. So you're going to cross a lot of different functional areas: sales, marketing, customer service, executives, IT. Pretty much the whole organization will often get involved in a true CRM initiative. And out of all of that, we'll then pull together really the series of documents or the deliverables that become the recommendation and the findings review. So that's kind of the 5 steps for a blueprint. And then within each of those areas, what we're trying to do is understand what are your requirements, what's the current state of the technology, people, and process, and then what is the recommendation? And that identifies what we call the gap. So that kind of tells us what we need to address as we go to implement. And then the key is figuring out what functional areas need to be involved, because this becomes your SMEs. And then what line of business systems will either be impacted or integrated with the CRM initiative. So those will commonly be CRM, marketing, ERP, operations, HR, really any of the technologies. Lots of Excel spreadsheets we typically find. Excel is the number one CRM according to some studies for companies that haven't bought CRM yet. And then out of that will be all the deliverables. So that's where we'll do the business requirements, the high-level design, the migration, et cetera. And I'll go through some examples of this. But the key to all of this is making sure we're keeping this aligned to those company strategies, really the culture, the goals, and the objectives. So that becomes the compass for this whole blueprinting exercise. So why don't we do this? So let me talk to the benefits real quick, and then we'll go into a couple quick case studies. So first of all, the big benefits of the blueprint are probably pretty obvious as you start to think about this from a roadmap or an action plan, is it starts to create a shared vision for the project. It is surprising sometimes how often this step is skipped, just making sure that everybody is on the same page and really understanding the reason for the initiative and what that definition of success is. And that can sometimes be a little difficult because sometimes the definition of success will be different for each of the different departments or groups. So you want to make sure you kind of bubble those up together and get some consensus. It obviously provides a roadmap on how to get to that successful state. And as we mentioned earlier, it will also identify those key metrics that you're going to use to gauge and measure how you're doing. And then finally, and this is kind of the thing that is really, really important, especially in CRM, because it's so focused on customers and a lot of different functional areas in the organizations, is you really want to start to understand the impacts of change. And change will come in three areas. It will come people, which is one of the harder ones to address. It will come in your processes that may need to be changed or adjusted. And then finally, it may require some changes from a technology standpoint. But something like CRM does affect all three of those areas. And so you do want to make sure that your blueprinting exercise is addressing all those. So what I thought I would do now that might be helpful is just to talk through a couple examples. And I'll just use two. One was a true selection and implementation of a CRM tool, and the second one is a re-implementation. Again, it sounds like that'll fit kind of the audience that we've got today.
Yep, great.
So if you'll notice, this is that same matrix that I talked about. We're just kind of filling it in now for this customer. And this is a mid-sized chemical manufacturing company. They're, I think, around $50 million in total revenues, slightly larger than that, if I recall. And what we did here is, again, we went through that 5-step process, but as we started to work through the functional areas and the line of business systems, you'll notice the functional areas were pretty typical. It was sales, marketing, customer service, the executive suite, IT, and then a few other. They had some product managers that needed to be involved with this because of the nature of their business. But what you'll notice that was very clear is there was no CRM and there was no BI tool in place. They were doing a lot with their ERP system, a lot with Excel, a lot with a reporting tool that they had, but they were really missing that foundational component. And you'll see that really drove the roadmap that we put together, obviously was to go in and pick a CRM and BI tool. The other thing from an organizational standpoint, they were really moving from a transactional sales model to more of a key account sales model. So they were going through change within the organization. And so we wanted to make sure that the future state, as we re-implemented, addressed that kind of dual sales model that they had. They also had this unique kind of business requirement, is that more, we would joke, but more than the salespeople sell. It's really a team-based selling. Because they're in a specialty market and they may be making special chemicals or compounds for their customers, product management would get involved. Customer service was often involved in the quoting and selling. They had a special business development group. And so it really was an all-hand sales moment, especially with some of their key accounts. So the new set of tools needed to address that. And then probably the biggest gap came as we started to understand, because obviously when you see no CRM with the size of company, there is CRM somewhere in the organization. And what we found is they were using a combination of spreadsheets and, probably more importantly, had taken their legacy ERP system and highly configured it to support things like contact management and some of the other things that you would typically do with a CRM tool. But the ERP tool was old, it was dated, It was something that they knew in the near term they were going to be upgrading. And so it created a really huge gap and issue for them, because to upgrade their ERP, they were going to lose all that configuration effort that they had gone through. So it became very clear that the CRM tool and selection was the number one priority at that point in time. And it needed to address this gap, essentially remove this gap, so they could move on and select an ERP in the future. And then a final solution consideration is they do a high volume of quotes, a lot of invoices, and because they are a team selling organization, that information needed to be available whether you were in the CRM tool, you were in the old ERP tool, or you were an external user. All that information needed to be, highly available at really any point in time. So it required a near real-time integration for them. So the deliverables then focused really in two key areas. Obviously, we needed to focus on CRM software selection, and then we also needed to look at this migration and integration in a way that it removed this gap. And the overall CRM selection needed to focus this kind of dual sales model. So as we put the roadmap together and we put the requirements together, that's what we prioritized around. So I'll go through these quickly, because the one thing with the blueprinting exercise, just like if you can imagine as you're building a house, the blueprints, while there are standard templates, they're often going to get adapted to the unique needs that each customer has. So this is just an example. And certainly if you don't see through the case studies today, reach out to Sarah or myself, and I'm sure we probably have some sort of artifact that might be similar to what you have done. But in this case, what we wanted to do is, this was the first time many of the people in the organization had ever worked with or gone through a selection of a tool like CRM. So the first thing we did is we just worked on what our approach was going to be. How are we going to select the product? CRM is notorious for what I call feature overload. So a lot of times when people are going out and they're trying to select the right CRM tool, they get just overloaded with literally hundreds, if not thousands, of features that the CRM tools have and that the publishers love to present. And so we try and get around that by really focusing on what's important to the business. I've had a couple cases where it's become so overwhelming that some of my clients got confused on what CRM tool did what. And so we wanted to make sure we stayed real focused on the requirements, and we did this through something we call job stories. So we built a series of definitions of requirements that they had, and that became what we call demo scenarios for the shortlist. And this is just a quick example of what we do from a shortlist analysis. In this case, it was a broader set than this, but this was kind of the final four, and we were trying to narrow it down to 3. And so what we did is we just looked at who had the most out-of-box functionality that fit their requirements and who would require the most configuration. We also like to sometimes look at non-traditional. So in this case, we looked at BPM Online, which has some light CRM. And you can see it pretty quickly fell out because it had some low fit and then medium fit, but nothing that was a high fit. And you can probably tell it narrowed down in this case to 3 of the leading CRM vendors. And then it kind of narrowed down, as you can probably see, as you'll see in just a second, kind of on who they selected. But it became pretty clear as we went through this process and we went through the demo scenarios on how to pick that best software tool. And I will be sharing who they picked in just a second. Then we built out a decision matrix. So this was, again, using those requirements and then a scoring mechanism and then demo scenarios, so they could really start to see how each of the tools would address their needs. And this is just a template that we developed over the years that really helps each of the groups and teams get on that same page to address this. And then finally, and you'll see this type of pattern, this is the integration approach that we came up with that allowed them to, in a future time, get rid of their ERP, but to use the BI and CRM tool, and then this idea of an integration in the middle, so that they could at some point in time replace this ERP with something else, but the integration was designed in a way to support that, so it didn't have to be completely rewritten when a new ERP was chosen. So those kind of fit their 3 key requirements, and the results were that they selected and implemented Salesforce, and they did this across the whole organization, and now they're actually expanding that globally, and they're even going to take it out to their partner channel. So it's been, I think, a very good success for them. And most importantly, they also, from an implementation standpoint, they removed all those ERP customizations, and those got moved into Salesforce. as a more traditional CRM solution. And so now they can focus on ERP for what ERP should do. And it's made it much easier for them to go out and make that ERP selection without losing any of the current functionality. Also, that integration pattern allowed really tight quote and invoice integration with the legacy ERP, but in a way that it can be replaced in the future as that new ERP comes in. And we'll show this more in the second case study, but we also used a sprint approach. And this is basically doing things in bite-sized pieces so you can transfer knowledge very quickly at the end of each sprint, which is typically about 3 weeks or so, and they can become more self-sufficient in areas where they want to. In this case, they wanted to be very self-sufficient on the ongoing configuration, reporting, et cetera, out of Salesforce, but are still using us on any of the kind of complex data or integration standpoint. So I think it was overall a very good success from that. Blueprint really provided that plan that we used for the overall implementation. And Sarah, did we get any questions at this point, or should I keep going forward?
We're thinking the same way. No questions quite yet, but this is a good time to just pause and remind people, if you have any questions at this point in the presentation, please put them in the question box and we'll address them as they come up. Thanks, Tony.
Great. So no problem. I will go into the second case study and hopefully that will bring up some more questions.
Great.
So the second case study, you're going to see again a similar pattern. Now this is a much larger organization in a different market, and so they're an energy supply company. The key difference here is they have what we call a high velocity sales model. So what this means is, and because they're in the energy space, as you can imagine, prices change and fluctuate on a daily, sometimes hourly basis, and the organization needs to react to that. They also, unlike the previous case study, they have both retail and wholesale channels. So they've got that kind of dual mix. And also because they're much larger and they've grown both organically and through acquisition, they had 5 different autonomous sales groups. And then as we looked at it, because of that legacy of growing through acquisition, they had multiple ERPs. So there wasn't a single back-end system. And they'd already, as an organization, made a heavy investment in Tableau, primarily to do reporting on top of those multiple ERPs. So it was what they were doing from a financial rollout strategy. They also had Sugar CRM in place, and they'd implemented that originally to really handle some of the, I'll call it more workflow, really customer onboarding than traditional Salesforce automation. And so we'll get into that. That was one of the gaps that was identified. And then from a business requirement standpoint, they had something that we see a bit when we see companies that have grown through acquisition and they have multiple sales groups, is everybody thinks that their needs are unique and they're different. And my sales group has a need that the other sales group doesn't have. And so it is hard to drive consensus across an organization when everybody wants the tool to be completely personalized to what they think are unique needs. And so that became one of the things that we wanted to both identify and validate through the roadmap, but probably more importantly, we wanted to use, and we used BrainSell as kind of the I would call us the facilitator for that. We helped kind of break through that thought process that each group was different. And so we helped kind of identify areas where they were different, but also where they were similar. And as I mentioned, the CRM was configured as a workflow tool, primarily for customer onboarding. And what we realized is the CRM tool, as it got re-implemented, needed to enhance the ability to get to what we call sales performance. So that was that daily, weekly, hourly performance of customers looking for anomalies and things like that. So it ended up being some of the work that they'd already started on Tableau. You know, we didn't want to redo that effort inside Sugar. We wanted to take advantage of the work that they'd already done. And so I'll show you in a second the way we actually attack that. Also for them, similar migration integration recommendations, larger organizations, so you can see the recommendation was a little bit different, and they'd already made some investments in this area. And then what we determined is really important for this team, because 2 of the sales groups were going to be new to Sugar and had not used CRM much in the past. The proof of concepts were really important. In fact, we did proof of concept demos for each of the groups independently, and then a general presentation. So we did multiple POCs so that they could start to understand, you know, what that future configuration of CRM was going to do and what the benefits were going to be. So probably see that this one has, because it's larger, had a lot more moving parts on it. So what we did, and I won't go through this in detail, but what we did to kind of help with while you have unique needs, there is some parallel and overlap, and I've hidden it, but the top here is each of the groups. And then we evaluated kind of what they had, and that's the green. It's in place, it's already implemented. And anywhere you see the orange kind of decoder ring on this, that meant that they had a high need, and then we looked at the effort. And so what you can tell visually here is there was a lot of overlap across the groups in terms of what their needs were. So while they were different, they were more similar than they thought. And what you can also see is the really big area of both need and big return, that's what this effort on the right means, was in this whole idea of integration, and specifically into their 2 ERPs and the work that they were already doing with Tableau. So we really narrowed in on the fact that this idea of using the BI tool along with CRM was where the big return for this organization was going to come from. They'd already made a large investment in Boomi from an integration standpoint. Great tool, but not saying that this is the tool for everybody, but for them, it was a really good fit. They already had Sugar, they already had Tableau, as I mentioned. And so we recommended, by this ended up not being SQL Azure, it ended up being actually SQL Server, but we came up with a methodology of kind of staging the data as we got it ready for CRM for them, and then using Tableau embedded inside Sugar. And so that gave a shortcut to the effort of re-implementing. So it was kind of an interesting approach to the integration. And what is interesting, and this is something a lot of times that we find people may not look at, is take a look at the assets that you've already got, that you've already invested in. And in some cases, you may not need to recreate those. So in this case, we're taking some of the Tableau components and we're embedding that inside the CRM tool. And most importantly, we're displaying it what's called in context. So as you move from account to account, the BI tool actually changes and drills to that account, and it bubbles up some of that performance data that's then used in the sales effort. So it was a really good win for them as a team. And then the final piece, and I won't go into this in great detail, but we'll do this a lot. You know, I always talk about this as sometimes the initiatives can feel like you're eating the elephant. And how do you eat an elephant? Well, you need to start at the most tender spot and in bite-sized pieces. And so we take this idea of a sprint approach to do that. So we'll break the project down into multiple sprints. Each sprint has its own kind of feature set associated with that. And we try and build these during that sprint to a point of being ready for release. And so it's a nice way of kind of chunking through the effort. It helps with user adoption because you're not releasing everything at once. It also helps you prioritize around kind of the things that are most important, because as you start to get these initiatives, you may find priorities are going to change. So like in this case, this organization, turns out they could solve the SMS integration sooner with another tool outside CRM. So they went down that path, and this got dropped from one of the later sprints. So it's just a way of kind of bite-size chunking the effort, and it just works really, really well. And it has a side benefit, as at the end of each sprint, you can do knowledge transfer back to the team so they can become more self-sufficient. So we just found this works really, really well on CRM implementations. So in their case, the results had some similarity, but essentially they were able to re-implement Sugar CRM with the 5 sales group, 2 of which I mentioned were new. They've been using, and we're having good success now with using Tableau embedded to provide that sales performance data in context within Sugar. And by the same thing can be done with Power BI, it can be done with Click, it can be done with a lot of the different BI tools if you've made an investment in that. That the integration pattern, while similar to the first company, had some slight differences because it took advantage of the tool sets and skills that they already have. And so we became more of an advisor on that with them actually doing the work. And as I mentioned, we used that same sprint project approach, which allowed for that knowledge transfer. And in several areas, they become very self-sufficient to the point where they really don't need us from a development standpoint anymore. And so those are hopefully 2 case studies that kind of give everybody an idea of what this blueprinting process is all about. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions, but hopefully we've also, through this, kind of answered is why a solution blueprint. why when you do your technology implementation, you don't want to end up with the Smith Mansion. You want to end up more like this, which is the Frank Lloyd Wright home in Pennsylvania, where the house was so well designed and so well spec'd and blueprinted, they were able to retain the environment that surrounded it, even to the point where the river that ran there is still running and runs right through the bottom of the house. So it's what you can do with good planning and with the right kind of blueprinting.
Great.
So with that, I think we're going to move into Q&A, right, sir?
Yeah, I'm going to steal the mouse from you.
Oh, sure.
And we've had a couple of questions come in, so let me
good.
Open them. So our first question, is this good for companies that already have CRM but need a do-over in terms of workflow?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I would argue definitely, and especially if you've already done an implementation. The great news, I know sometimes when an implementation doesn't go great, that can be a bit painful, but there's also a lot of learning that comes out of that. So the blueprinting exercise is great for that. And I didn't do the case study here, but have done a couple where we've done just a true re-implementation of CRM. And so the blueprinting exercise fits well. And the great news is that can typically be done pretty quickly for that type because we're just re-implementing. But yeah, it's a very, very good fit for that.
Great. Okay. And let's see, we have a few more here. So we talked a little bit, let's see, this one. How much does this cost? So I think we alluded to this maybe a bit, yeah. But do you have any other details maybe?
Yeah. So it varies a little bit. And we have a planner for this. So if there's a specific need for a specific customer, would be glad to sit with you and kind of work through that. But the costs are driven really off of three things. They're driven off the number of functional areas we're going to look at, the number of systems we're going to look at, and then essentially how many areas we're going to be either choosing or re-implementing for. But they range on the low end. Smallest ones are slightly under $10,000 to where they've gone all the way up into the 50 plus range, but they vary a great deal from that. And if you are on the lower end from a budget standpoint, we can even help in more of an advisory role where you do more of the work and we kind of advise you and provide the template. So don't let budget be an inhibitor on this. We'll work with you to make sure it fits within your budget. And it is budget based. This is not a time and material initiative. We come in and plan it around that. So you do know coming in what the costs are going to be, and it doesn't vary.
Great.
So hopefully that answered that question. If not pipe back in on that.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Okay. Oh, this is a good one. So this individual says, this all seems pretty straightforward. Why can't I just do this on my own?
Oh, that's a great question. So technically you can. The only issue with that we see is you're kind of trying to advise yourself, and certainly don't have in many cases the experience. As example, we added it up one day, and our collective team has done close to 1,000 different CRM projects across, and I've been involved personally in well over 100. So we've just seen what works and what doesn't, and so we can provide that kind of best practice advice. But the template could be followed, but again, you're both inside the organization, so it can sometimes be hard to address some of those people, process, and technology pieces. So I think we can help from that standpoint.
Great, that's good. Okay, one question I can quickly address. Is the slide deck available on your website? It's not available yet. Following the webinar, we will get it up on our website and we'll send a link out to everyone so that you have access to it. Okay, let's see. Another question that came in for you, Tony, what would I need to do to prepare for an engagement like this?
Oh, great. Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And one of the things that if we do this with a client, we send out kind of a prep document. But really what you want to do to prepare is a couple things. You want to identify who the key subject matter experts are going to be in the organization. So as an example, if the initiative was going to cross sales, marketing, and let's say product management, you'd want to identify who those SMEs are for each, and make sure to prep them that the discovery on this is going to be around what do they need and want the tool to provide, and start to capture some of that. And then the same thing on the system side is to identify those systems and who the experts are that can provide that detail to us as the facilitator. So that's kind of the prep work. And then what we typically provide is the type of questions you'll want to ask, because the questions need to be oriented towards what are you trying to accomplish, not what features would you like to have. Because when you ask about features, everybody comes back and everybody wants a dashboard. And so obviously we have to understand what's going to drive the data that's going to feed into that dashboard. So that's what the questions will start to address. So again, hopefully that answered the question. If it didn't, let us know.
Okay, great. And we have one last question, unless there's any other. Feel free to throw them in the question box now, folks. But the final question I have in this list is, how long does this take? I think you talked about a little bit at the beginning of the presentation, Tony, but let's.
Yeah, no, it's a great question again. So the timing on this, it's a little variable depending upon how much is going to be covered, but probably the shortest duration on these is the 2 to 3 week period. It does require a little bit of pre-work, typically a workshop ideally on site, and then some follow-up. So that typically will take 2 to 3 weeks just because of the coordination of people. The long end, we try not to let these get longer than a 6. I've had a few go out to 8 weeks, but that's really, it's now 2 months in the organization, and we don't want that much of a delay. So short answer would be 2 to 6 weeks at max.
Okay, great. That looks like all the questions we have for today. So before we wrap up, Tony, any final words?
No, just I think, well, actually, we're just going to say this, is I live and breathe this. So as Sarah mentioned, I've been around the space for a little while, and I like to help in terms of helping CRM be successful. So if I can provide any help or advice, please feel free to reach out, and happy to spend some time, hopefully providing some direction, if nothing else. So don't hesitate to reach out, and hopefully we can help.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. So just to reiterate what Tony is saying, for everyone who attended this webinar today, we're offering 20 minutes of a complimentary, basically virtual meeting with Tony to start exploring your people, your processes, what your tech stack looks like, and seeing what we can do to help move you towards your growth objectives. So if you're interested in taking advantage of that, please send an email to marketing@brainsell.net. And when we send out the recording tomorrow morning, we'll also include this information in that email, so you have it to share with your colleagues as well. So thank you, Tony, for joining us today. This was really great, good stuff. And thank you all for joining us for this webinar. And we will send out the recording to you in the morning. Thank you.
Great, thanks everyone.